The SolarWinds user experience team gets to talk to folks across the entire spectrum of IT practices and disciplines, from network engineers and sysadmins to DevOps practitioners and cloud advocates, from newcomers fresh out of their training program to grizzled veterans who can still recall the paper cuts from punch cards and the iridescent glow of dumb terminals. But a conversation our UX folks have been having more and more is with people who may not be new to IT, but they're new to SolarWinds. Specifically, they inherited, rather than built, the Orion installation they find themselves in charge of. And boy, do they have questions. Now, before we dive into the main part of this, I want to take a second and just talk about what UX is and what you folks do and what people can expect.
Sure. Well, UX means user experience. And if you haven't talked to us before, the user experience team, there is one at SolarWinds. Hey, we're here. Two of us are at least, but we're actually a really big team spread across the globe, made up of researchers and designers. So Kelly and I are both researchers, and we get to talk to our users a lot, which I get all excited about. But basically, we work very closely with our users to understand their problems, who they are, who they talk to, and the types of problems they're trying to solve, the problems they have when it comes to using our products. So we also work very closely with our designers, our developers, and product teams to communicate this information and help them understand answer these questions as well. And really, at the end of the day, we want to make our products easier to use, more efficient, so that as a user, you don't come to Orion and be like, oh my gosh, what is this? What do I do here? I'm lost, confused.
I don't know what to do. Tyrannosaurus arms.
I don't know what I'm doing. So basically, that's what we do. A variety of ways that we do work with our users, which I'll get to in a little bit. But one of the things we do is surveys sometimes. So Kelly actually had a survey that was out on THWAC a few months ago and had some really interesting findings.
Yeah, actually, we did a survey in conjunction with THWAC and Danielle and the folks on the THWAC team. We sent the survey out to many thousands of people, and we had a very high response rate. We had 1,900 people respond, and of those, about 1,600 were Orion users. And we asked a variety of questions. It was quite a long survey, and again, great response rate. What we found out was about 50% of our Orion users inherited an Orion that somebody else had built and maintained, and then boom, now it's yours.
Wow.
So very, very high rate of people having an inherited instance of Orion. You know, we found out other interesting things in the survey, some of which I'll talk about later. But one thing that was interesting as well was 21% of people consider themselves SolarWinds novices, and 23% of the people considered themselves novices with best practices around monitoring.
Monitoring in general. Yeah. And the big point for me in all those numbers was that if you feel like you're the only person who's in this position, you are absolutely not, and we have the numbers to prove it.
Yeah, more people actually inherited their Orion than built from scratch.
Right.
So.
Okay, so having talked about that for a minute, I want to get to the main point, which is you've inherited this environment, and now you're just not sure. Is it broken? Is it you? Do you need more education? How do you know whether it's working or not? Because it's just been dropped in your lap. So the first question is, how do you know? How do you know if it's completely ruined or if it's really mostly you? And I will start off by saying, why not both? It could actually be that it's a little broken and you might need some education too. But the good news is we're going to address both of those in either case. So that aside, what are some ways that we've built into the user experience that you can tell how healthy the environment is?
So one of the things that we've done fairly recently in the UI is actually the Orion Health page. And you can go there, and the same as with other pages in Orion, if you see a lot of red, it's a bad sign. If you see a lot of green, it's a good sign. But that's a good starting place to start with the Orion Health page.
So we also hear from folks that there's particular problems, and some come up more often than others.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
One would be, so I sometimes go to trade shows and SWUGs, and both occasions talk to people who come up and say, I inherited SolarWinds. Oh, surprise, guess there's a lot of you out there. And what's your biggest problem is usually my answer, or how's it going? And the pretty common thing I hear is my alerts. I don't know what to do with them. The person before me set them up and they're so noisy, and now this this is known as the noisy thing that I can't make quiet. It's just this beast that I cannot contain, and I don't know where to start.
Right, and I've said this before, the environment may not be broken and you may not be educated, just your alerts may suck. Right? That could be it. But I also think there's an interesting analogy to barking dogs with this, because it's not that it was created wrong, it was just that it developed slowly and naturally, and the person who built it didn't notice how loud it was getting, in the same way that I don't notice my dog barking because it's my dog, and I've had it since it was a puppy, and I love it, and it's just, I'm used to its patterns, but the neighbor, that's a beast, and it needs to shut up.
And it never shuts up.
Right, and when you inherit an environment, I think that that's actually a really good opportunity, right?
Yeah, I think when you inherit an environment, you're hearing that barking dog. So you are in a position to do something about it. You're in a position to tune alerts and actually shut down things that don't add value.
Right, right.
It's a good chance to go back and revisit things that maybe weren't set up right to begin with, or just were outdated over time.
So I think another thing that we hear from folks is that nothing that's being monitored is important to me. So what do we do about that?
So yeah, this is a great chance again to kind of go back and revisit maybe some conversations that haven't been had over a while. Talk to other people at your company who are using this system or would like to monitor what they need to monitor. And sometimes what I, again, have heard from people who've said, yeah, the previous person put so many monitoring interfaces on the network, so much of things that we don't even care about, and now our license count is blown. What are we going to do with this thing? And really, you can come in and save the day and go back and fix it. Run a new discovery. Talk to your teams, that not only you as monitoring admin, but other people who would be looking at the tool, and say, what do you want to monitor? How can I serve you?
Right.
And run new discoveries, start getting in, monitoring what you actually need to monitor.
Right. Like any beautiful garden, it needs to be pruned and tended to. Okay, I might be layering it on a little thick here. But the idea is
Barking dog's garden.
Right, barking dogs, it's all the natural order of monitoring things. All right, so the last thing that I want to talk about is another thing that we hear a lot is I have missing data. That I look at a chart or a graph and it's got like a line here and then it's blank, and then I have another line there and it's blank. And what does that tell us about it?
It's saying that there's probably something wrong with your polling intervals. You know, if you have polling intervals for different types of equipment or different types of devices that are not in sync, you could have big gaps.
Okay, so it might be a scalability issue. It might be that you just need to tune things. Again, you might have too many interfaces or too many elements that you need to prune out. So it's another opportunity again. Okay, so let's say that we've determined that the environment is not a mess. It's not a problem. First of all, take a moment, celebrate that. Yay, it's not a mess. Your SolarWinds environment is not broken. You don't have to blow it up from outer space. It's okay. So now I think you have to figure out how to get your arms around what the environment is and what it's doing. And you also need to figure out how you can get up to speed on things. And there are a lot of resources in terms of education and training. I'm just going to run these down. There is, of course, thwack.com and Thwack Camp, which here we are, right? So there's that. SolarWinds Lab, our monthly video series, is also available. You mentioned SWUGs, SolarWinds user groups that go all around the country. So that's another one. SolarWinds Academy actually has training, both live training and then pre-recorded training and then self-paced training. There's all sorts of options there. There's Smart Start, which is a way to get up to speed with the environment and get it, if you need to install a module or get something upgraded. Partner training, our partners also have a variety of training options that they offer independent of SolarWinds itself. There's Premier Support, which actually just became available. So there's a whole range of support things just for Premier. You can request an engineer to do a health check of your environment, to actually look through it, and with their experience they can say, oh, I can see that you have a this and a that and the other thing, and that can be really helpful just talking tech to tech. There's guided upgrades. If you know that you need to do just a small upgrade, but you're not comfortable with it, you've never done it before, we'll actually stay on the phone with you and watch what you're doing and say, okay, that's what it's supposed to say, that's what it's doing, so that's another option. And finally, there's the Orion Health page, which we just looked at, and not only does it tell you, is it healthy, but also by looking at the components, you can tell what is made up of, what your Orion environment is made up of, and that's another way to get some education about the environment as a whole, right?
Yeah. And going back to that survey we talked about earlier, we asked a lot of questions around what resources people were familiar with. And one of the interesting things was nobody, unless you're a THWAC MVP, is familiar with all of the resources. Maybe if you're an MVP, you do, but outside of that, people don't understand what's available to them. 47% of our users had never heard of SolarWinds Academy.
Wow.
40% of our users had never heard of Customer Success Center, which is very popular. So it's very, very common for people not to understand all of the breadth and depth of resources available to them.
Right, and the thing that I want to make sure people understand is that there is a wide variety of them. You don't have to know all of them, but there's a lot there. Okay, so we have some resources to get some education, but we still need to get our arms around the environment as it is now. And one of my favorite ways to do that, and it is kind of old school, is one of the oldest interfaces in Orion, which is the message center. If you come from a NOC sensibility, it is wonderful, but even if you're not, it is simply a list, a laundry list of all the events, all the monitoring, all the changes that occur moment by moment, and you can get a really good sense of how your environment is operating second to second. So that's where I like to start. But there's some other options as well. So what would you suggest, again, to figure out what's going on?
So for me, one area you would want to check is just the report scheduler. Who's getting reports? What reports are going out? Are they the right reports? So it's always interesting to go talk to report consumers or report users and hear what they're hearing about the system as well.
Yeah, and talking to your users, so we talk to our users, but you can also talk to your users. So those are your external users who you might want to find out. So we do what we call show me sessions, or I like what you call them.
I call them ride-alongs because it's much more macho. It sounds like a police, cruiser kind of thing.
Yeah, so call them what you want. But basically the goal is to understand what the background on the people who will be using the system, what it is they want to monitor, and also too, what are their challenges, what are their concerns when it comes to just doing their job and how you can help them better. So specifically with what you can monitor, ask them, what devices do you want to monitor? What applications do you want to look at? And so for us, it is just to show me how you're using the tool currently. And as they walk through it, you start to learn just so much more about what they're doing, the types of things they're seeing, and some things that bother them that maybe are opportunities to fix.
And one thing I really liked was something you said earlier about the life cycle of a monitoring engineer. So what was that again?
Yeah, so the life cycle of a monitoring engineer is to go back and continue to have conversations with your stakeholders to better understand how the monitoring is working for them. And so one of the things that we do as researchers, we follow up with our users as well to understand how the tools are working better for them. And when I like to ask, usually if you've inherited the system, what was the one piece of advice that you'd give yourself on day one when you took over SolarWinds? And that's typically two things I hear are, I should have those conversations with my users, with my stakeholders sooner, and join THWAC sooner.
So let's say that it's not okay, that the environment is having problems. I think then the next decision point that people come to is, can I fix it in place, or do I have to nuke it from orbit? That's really what it comes down to. So what are some of the deciding factors there in terms of those two decision points?
I think there's a few that are fairly easy. One of the ones is, are you more than 3 versions back on any module that you have? So if you have multiples, look if you're more than 3 versions back on anything. And another one that comes to mind is polling capacity. So are you 30% or less overloaded on your polling engines?
I think also if you call the SolarWinds engineering folks and they say that your hardware can handle the upgrade, that's another indicator. And I think the last one is sort of the worst case scenario. You can't afford to shut down monitoring, and you can't afford more hardware to do a point-to-point migration. doing nothing is not your better option. You might as well try to do the upgrade to get going because it's going to be a slow, painful death otherwise. Yeah. So that's an in-place upgrade. What are some of the factors that would tell you have to completely blow it away and start over again?
So the first one would be the opposite of what you both just said.
Okay, sure, fair enough.
So more than 3 versions back.
More than 30%.
Yes.
Right. All
and
those
an engineer says, go for it.
Right.
Another one would be that your original installation was done on a trial version.
Sure. Okay, right. POC, never upgraded, absolutely. Okay, so I'll add to that one. If your installation is running on SQL Express, no, you gotta go to new stuff. And also, if your database is on the same polling engine, so that's like a major design flaw, yeah, you really need to just destroy the whole thing and go again.
So the last reason I can think of to nuke and start all over is if your consumers or users, whatever you want to call them, consumers, users, are telling you that the data is all wrong in Orion and they can prove it. That's a really good reason to go ahead and blow it up and start over again from scratch. So at the beginning, we talked about a survey we had run where 50% of users inherited an Orion. And in fact, that's part of the reason why we've done this particular session. I think it's really important to remember if you're one of those 50%, you're not alone. Most common way for people to get involved with a SolarWinds product is to inherit an Orion that somebody else has stood up. So you're not alone. Take advantage of some of the resources we've talked about today. And when you're confident and ready in 3 to 6 months, whenever that is, you've got everything dialed in, definitely go ahead, come back, jump in, and help other users. Because that's how the community works. Pay it forward.